Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you listening. I hope that you're all fit and well. You join me today as we continue on with our exciting journey through the book of Daniel. Today we will begin chapter number 6. Our reading comprises the first 9 verses of this chapter. So this is Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom. And over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the Lord of his God." So these governors and satraps thronged before the king, and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever! All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisers, have consulted together to establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree, and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed, according to the Lord of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. This is the word of the Lord. Before we begin our examination of the opening 9 verses of chapter 6, let us briefly review what we looked at last Sunday. Last time we concluded our study of chapter number 5. It brought the episode involving the writing on the wall to a dramatic conclusion. As the army of the Medes and Persians surrounded the city of Babylon, King Belshazzar decided to throw a party. Whilst the soldiers outside sharpened their swords and prepared for battle, the Babylonian elite stuffed their faces with food and quaffed glasses of wine. The king was so confident that the city walls would not be breached that he called for the Jewish temple treasures to be brought out. This foolish man had decided to mock God by using these sacred items to toast his pagan gods. This sacrilegious act was interrupted by the appearance of a mysterious hand sent by God. The hand wrote a message on the plaster wall behind the king. The king and all who witnessed this event were, not surprisingly, greatly shocked. This shock was further increased when no one in the royal court was able to read the message. It was at this point in the evening that the Queen Mother appeared and told the king all about a great man from the past. This Jewish exile had been of great service to King Nebuchadnezzar. He had shown himself to be full of the Holy Spirit, and as a result was a man of understanding and wisdom. She was sure that he could help the king with this mysterious writing. Onto the stage steps Daniel, now an old man in his late 70s or early 80s. The years, however, have not dulled or impaired him in any way. He has maintained, in fact, never wavered in his commitment and devotion to Yahweh. He tells the king that he is not interested in the rewards that he offers. He will, however, tell him what the message means. Before doing so, he provides a bit of contextual background. This was not the first time that God had made himself known to the kings of Babylon. Belshazzar's grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had encountered the God Most High on several occasions. In fact, God had sent 7 years of madness upon the king to teach him a lesson on humility. The lesson had its effect. Nebuchadnezzar finally accepted that it was God who was sovereign and not him. He placed his faith in God and went on to worship him and not himself. The purpose of this brief history lesson is to demonstrate to Belshazzar that he has no excuse for his rejection of God. He knows what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, which just highlights his stupidity in mocking God and acting in a prideful and arrogant way. Daniel then proceeds to interpret the message. The message in essence tells the king that God has judged him. God has measured and weighed him in the balance. And sadly for the king, he comes up short. As a result, his kingdom will be divided into parts. In actual fact, it is very soon to be conquered and divided between the Medes and the Persians. The chapter ends by telling us that upon that very night, King Belshazzar was killed. Darius the Mede took over, and he will be at the centre of what we look at today as we begin chapter number 6. The 6th chapter of Daniel is probably one of the best known and most beloved in the whole Bible. I would wager that every Christian, from the youngest to the oldest, knows about the story of Daniel in the lion's den. From our time in Sunday school to being old and mature in the faith, it is a tale that both excites and encourages us. When we examine it as a story, we recognize that it contains all of the necessary ingredients to make it memorable. A good man, a hero, who is promoted to a position of importance. A wicked group, villains who plot his downfall. A king who is manipulated into making a rash decision and then regrets it. A pit of hungry and ferocious lions. And best of all, a God who saves. So it's a story then that has something for everyone. Chapter 6 marks another important transition in the book of Daniel. It will be the final chapter in which we get historical narrative. The wonderful stories of Daniel and his friends in exile come to an end, and from chapter 7 on the emphasis shifts to detailing Daniel's visions. Chapter 6 also marks a transition from one empire to another. The first 4 chapters tell us about the empire of Babylon in its heyday. It was indeed the golden head of the statue, ruled over for 40 years by its greatest monarch, King Nebuchadnezzar. Chapter 5 picks up a number of years after his death. There has been a great deal of political intrigue in this short span of time. Several monarchs have occupied the throne. And then we arrive at the very last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, King Belshazzar. His reign was a short one. The all-conquering Medo-Persians arrived and absorbed Babylon into its own mighty empire. At the end of chapter 5, we were introduced to a new king. He was 62-year-old Darius the Mede. As I pointed out to you last time, he was probably not the supreme ruler of Medo-Persia. That man's name was Cyrus the Great. Darius then was most likely one of his most competent generals, a man named Gubaru. Ancient documents show that he had the power to make appointments, to assemble an army, to levy taxes, and to possess palaces. Gubaru then was, in a very real sense, the king over Babylon, and he was given the task of managing things until Cyrus arrived to take over. The Persian Empire would grow to be the largest that the world had yet seen. It would eventually encompass much of modern-day Turkey, Egypt, and parts of India and North Africa, as well, of course, as Babylonia. It was an empire that would last for 208 years, before falling to the Greeks, led by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Well, with that brief bit of background in place, let's dive into today's account. Verses 1 and 2. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. The empire of Babylon has now been merged with that of Medo-Persia. It was a huge piece of real estate. At its height it stretched all the way from Greece to India. It's not easy to govern such a large area. However, the Persians were highly organized and efficient. They divided their empire up into 127 provinces. One of these provinces was the area formerly known as Babylon. This was the area that Darius was given authority over. Even though he was not the supreme leader of Persia, it seems as though he was given autonomy to organize and manage things as he saw fit. His plan was to create an efficient ruling system. You can see it illustrated here on the screen. He would be at the top, under the ultimate authority of the king, that's King Cyrus. Below him would be 3 governors or presidents, who would be in charge of 120 satraps. A satrap is an old Persian word that means something along the lines of a provincial ruler, a local governor, a prince or official. Each level would report to the one above, and because each person in the hierarchy wanted to excel and impress those above, the system worked well. As we know, any humanly devised system is only as good as the people that are occupying it. Let us think for a moment of a sporting analogy to illustrate this point. A sports team might employ good coaches, build great training facilities, and develop a nice charter for success. However, if the players they recruit are of a low standard, are too old or injury prone, or just have a rotten attitude, then the team is unlikely to succeed. King Darius has similar recruitment issues. He had to carefully consider who he would appoint to these important government posts. The success of the whole endeavour depends upon finding the best people. Darius would know that King Cyrus was monitoring the situation. If things did not go well, ancient kings were not slow to act. Darius would quickly be replaced. In verse 2 we learn that one of the 3 governors beneath Darius was to be Daniel. I'm sure his appointment was a little controversial. Firstly, he was an old man. I'm afraid that many people today are quite ageist. They judge people on their age and often ignore or dismiss their valuable experience and the knowledge that they have built up over a lifetime. I have to mention here the recent situation regarding US President Joe Biden. Many have referred to his age and suggested that he is too old to hold the office of president. With respect, it was not an age issue. The reason that he rightly stepped down from the possibility of re-election was because of his cognitive decline. He was not mentally fit for the office. It had nothing to do with his age per se. So in summary, older people then often have a great deal to offer. We should respect them and utilize their knowledge and wisdom. Secondly, Daniel was a foreigner. I'm sure there were many Medes and Persians who would have liked the job to have gone to someone from their own cultural group. So the fact that he was given this important post tells us a number of significant things about Daniel. It tells us that he was very well regarded or respected, and that he still held a good reputation. It also tells us that, despite his age, he was still continuing to impress. He still had a great deal to offer, and people knew it. Finally, and most importantly, it tells us that God was still using him in a mighty way. The purpose for this elaborate system of government is given to us at the end of verse 2. It is designed to prevent loss. The loss in view here is twofold. The king does not want to lose territory through rebellious uprisings. He also does not want to lose money or goods because people are evading the tax system. Good governance can prevent this from happening. Well, let's read on and see how Daniel fares in this new job. Verse number 3. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. We might reimagine what is happening here as a quarterly job appraisal. Picture the 3 governors sitting in a waiting room, pacing about or biting their nails as they wait nervously. They're waiting to be called in to see King Darius, who will assess their efforts and give them his report. In comes Governor number 1. He has performed quite well. He's done nothing wrong, but equally has not excelled. Darius is pleased, but not that impressed. He gets a B on his report card. Come in Governor number 2. He has not done a very good job. There is a slight whiff of corruption surrounding this man. Darius is unimpressed. He is given a D on his report card. Come in Governor number 3, Daniel. Darius is most impressed. Daniel has done an excellent job. He has proven to be an outstanding official. He gets an A-star on his report card. His skill, and most importantly his integrity, was far beyond the other 2 governors. We are told here that an excellent spirit was in him. We might understand this to mean that Daniel was either a man of outstanding ability, or that he possessed an excellent attitude. In truth, both things most likely applied to him. Of course, we should also recognize where this all came from. He possessed this wonderful ability or attitude because he was greatly influenced by the Holy Spirit. So superior was Daniel when compared to the other governors that Darius was of a mind to promote him. He ought to be ruling the whole realm, meaning the whole of the province of Babylon. Darius most likely means that he will hand over his role to Daniel. He will then be able to enjoy being a king and let Daniel get on with the day-to-day management of the province. Wow! Just pause and take that in for a moment. Daniel, who is in his mid to late 80s, is so good that he should be running the whole province. I mentioned a moment ago that ageism still exists in many today. But equally today, ageism can also work in the opposite direction. Many, when they reach a certain age, voluntarily drop out and believe they have little left to contribute. Their attitude seems to be that, since they are now old, it's time to retire. They have nothing of value to offer to the next generation. This is simply not true. Allow me to tell you about some of the achievements of older people, just to reassure you that you're not too old to contribute and still make a difference. William Gladstone was the oldest man to serve as British Prime Minister. He was 82 years old when he took office for the 4th and final time. John Wesley continued to travel widely and preach into his 80s. He only reluctantly stopped travelling when ill health forced him to retire. Thomas Edison was still busy inventing things into his 80s. And what about the playwright George Bernard Shaw? He was still writing plays into his 90s. Let me leave you with the biblical example of Anna. Luke tells us that she was a prophetess who did not depart from the temple. She was 84 years old, but despite her age, continued to serve God with fasting and prayers day and night. So let me state quite clearly, a believer should never retire at any age from serving the Lord. There is always work to be done. This was certainly the case for Daniel, but sadly not everyone was pleased with his efforts and excellent service. A group of jealous rivals, the villains in our story, had emerged. They most definitely did not like the idea of him being promoted. Well, let us read on. Verses 4 and 5. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. News, it seems, had emerged regarding Daniel's possible promotion. There was great disquiet. His fellow governors and the satraps below them were not happy. They gathered together to discuss this alarming development. Why, you might wonder, were these men not happy? Well, possibly it came down to simple envy or jealousy. They craved the position of power potentially being offered to Daniel. Maybe they thought he did not warrant such a promotion. Perhaps Daniel's honesty and integrity was a problem. Maybe his goodness annoyed them. Perhaps he hindered their attempts at corruption. Or it might have been something far more personal. Perhaps they disliked him because he was a Jew or a foreigner. Possibly some thought that he was too old and wanted to replace him with someone from the next generation. There may be some element of truth in all of these explanations. However, we must never overlook the deeper spiritual elements in play. Those who sincerely love God and seek to honour him make themselves a target for Satan. He loves nothing more than to bring such people down. So the conspirators gather and discuss how they might bring about his downfall. With what might they charge him? Corruption? No, Daniel is honest to a fault. Neglect of his duties? No, Daniel is an excellent government official. Moral failings? He's a womanizer, a big drinker, a party animal. No, Daniel is beyond reproach. When we consider Daniel's age, and the fact that he had served as a government official for 50 or so years, that's an amazing thing to say. Today's politicians manage to disgrace themselves and their office, often in just a few short years. Now we shouldn't misunderstand what we are being told here. We should not read these verses and assume that Daniel was actually sinless or perfect. Only the Lord Jesus Christ was sinless and perfect. But Daniel was a man of great integrity. So what are they to do? How can they get to Daniel? We read that they came upon the idea to use Daniel's deeply held religiosity against him. It had not escaped their attention that Daniel was a God-fearing man. Everyone knew that he worshipped the one true God and refused to bow down before pagan idols. The king of the Persian gods was Ahura Mazda. It was this god that they believed had created all things. So here then was their chance. They could trap him by forcing him into choosing between the Persian laws of the land and his faith. They knew, or perhaps strongly suspected, that due to his steadfast character and commitment to the God of Israel, that he would never compromise his faith and worship idols. This is still a very effective tactic today. Christians are often placed in a very difficult position, having to choose between God's laws and the laws of men. When we think back to the COVID pandemic, we saw this quite clearly. The governments in some countries banned church gatherings. What were Christians to do? Obey man and not meet, or disobey God by not gathering together? Actually, the choice is easy. God's laws always take precedence over the laws of men. We are to obey the laws of those who govern us until the point where they ask us to break or ignore God's laws. When that occurs, we obey God and not man. So now, with their plan in place, the conspirators go and visit the king. Verses 6 to 8. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king, and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the councillors and advisers, have consulted together to establish a royal statute, and to make a firm decree, that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed, according to the Lord of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. We have an idiom in English which goes, there is strength in numbers. It means that a larger group is more likely to be successful in an endeavour than a smaller group. That certainly seems to be the case here. A large group of satraps and the other two governors gather before the king. Perhaps they want to bully or intimidate him a little with their numbers. They're trying to convince him that they are all agreed upon this course of action. We read a long list of those they have apparently consulted on this matter. The governors, satraps, administrators, councillors and advisers. This is of course not the case. We know for a fact that one of the 3 governors, Daniel, had not agreed to this, but there was no way they were going to tell this to the king. They inform the king that they are all in agreement in wanting him to establish a royal statute and make a decree. This is ceremonial talk for passing a binding law. The law that they are proposing is as follows. They want to make the king the nation's god for a period of 30 days. He is to be the only one that is to be prayed to or petitioned during this time. Why, you might wonder, would the king be persuaded by such an argument? Well, on one level it would appeal to his vanity. I'm sure he was flattered to be held up and treated like a god. What ancient and any modern rulers would not want to be revered and worshipped as being a living god? To us today, the whole idea of making a human being into a god seems ludicrous. This is because we are accustomed to and have been shaped by Judeo-Christian beliefs about God. The Bible teaches us that God is the creator. This means that he is wholly separate and distinct from human beings, the creatures. We also accept that to be God means to be holy, righteous and perfect. We sinful human beings fall way short. But the ancient pagan mind was not shaped by such beliefs. The gods they worshipped were at times fallible. They made mistakes and did stupid things. Many ancients also believed that their kings were gods. This was a belief held by the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and many others. So we should perhaps then not be surprised that Darius didn't simply dismiss this suggestion. Also, on a more practical level, perhaps he could see the political benefits of doing this. The Babylonians had just been conquered and absorbed into the Persian Empire. There was then a great need to unify the kingdom, to bring it together and coalesce it around one universal idea. So perhaps then he looked at this as a good way to help convert the defeated Babylonians and turn them into loyal Persians. So King Darius may have thought it was a good idea to get everyone to focus exclusively on him for a month. He would shortly greatly regret this decision. We also learn here of the punishment proposed for anyone breaking this law. A lawbreaker is to be thrown most likely into a pit or artificial enclosure of ferocious lions. This was perhaps not as surprising as it seems. Many ancient kings kept wild beasts at their disposal. They used these for sport or entertainment. These lions were deliberately kept hungry so as to make them an effective way of dispatching prisoners. Here, though, we see a distinction in the way that convicted men were executed. In Babylon, as you will recall, people were burned to death in large ovens. However, the Persians worshipped fire, therefore they threw their prisoners to the lions. I don't suppose either is a particularly nice way to die. With their proposition explained, the officials urged the king to sign and make this law. We shall consider the significance of this as we look at our final verse for today. Verse number 9. Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. King Darius has been convinced. He signs the written decree put before him. Once it was signed by the king, it became unbreakable. Even the king himself could not change or alter the law. There was a very good reason for this. The Persians believed that the king spoke on behalf of the gods. The gods told the king what to do, and he did it. Since the gods were all-powerful and all-knowing, they could never be wrong on any issue, and therefore never needed to change their minds. So a law once passed could not be altered. We note here an important distinction between the Babylonians and the Persians. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, was an absolute monarch, or more accurately, an absolute dictator. There was no authority higher than him. He sat above the law. Therefore he was able to alter or change laws as he saw fit. But this did not apply to King Darius. Persian rulers ruled their nations, but they sat under the law. It was the law that ultimately dictated what could or couldn't be done. So what the Persian officials did here was manipulate or coerce the king into signing into law something that could not be changed. Next time, Lord willing, we will see what becomes of Daniel and how the king bitterly regrets signing this decree. Lessons to learn. I have two comments to make based on today's passage. Number one, being a good representative for the kingdom. Daniel was an exemplary government official. After 50+ years of service, nothing could be found with which to condemn him. I'm not simply referring to serious charges, such as corruption or being open to bribery, moral failings, or even being continually late or tardy. They could not even dredge up any claims that he'd sneak off early once in a while, sleep at his desk, or that he used the office telephone to order pizza. No, we are told that no fault could be found in him. Isn't that amazing? What a wonderful example he presents to us. I wonder how we measure up. If people were to scrutinize your work history, what would they discover? Would they find that you are often late returning after lunch? That you waste some of your working day surfing the internet or looking at your smartphone? Maybe you are often rude or short-tempered with a difficult customer or even a work colleague. Or perhaps far worse, maybe you turned the other way when a colleague broke the rules. Perhaps you took or borrowed work property without getting permission. My point is that in all probability that is something that we have done wrong in the past. None of us, after all, is perfect. What we need to remember, though, is our role and place as ambassadors in Christ's kingdom. Every nation sends special representatives to live and operate in their foreign embassies. These men and women represent their nation state. They work to facilitate and maintain good relations, develop trade ties, and help their fellow citizens who reside in that country. As Christians living here in a foreign nation, a place that is not our real home, we have many of the same duties. We are here representing Christ's values. We are to project a Christ-like attitude in all we do and say. In doing this, we are attempting to forge good relations with the world, so that the gospel message is appealing. We should also, of course, be looking out for our fellow kingdom citizens. We should be attentive to their needs, be they either spiritual or material. Daniel proved to be an excellent ambassador for God. May we, through the guidance and wisdom of the Holy Spirit, also serve well in all that we are called to do. Number 2. Don't act in haste. We have an idiom in English which goes, act in haste, repent at leisure. It means that when we do something without paying close attention or thinking carefully about what we are doing, we are likely to regret it in the future. This is certainly what happened to King Darius in today's account. When his governors and satraps thronged around him, they forced him into acting in haste. He signed into a law, a decree which was foolish. Instead of stepping back and carefully weighing things up, he acted quickly with undue haste. He did something that later he bitterly regretted. I'm sure that there are times in the past when we have all acted with haste, when we have said or done something without carefully thinking first and have come to regret it. How easy it is in a moment of anger or irritation to speak rashly or foolishly. As we read in the book of Proverbs, do you see a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. Proverbs 29:20. So we all need to take a few moments, especially in times of stress and anger. We need to calm ourselves and spend a few moments in prayerful consideration before we do speak. Or perhaps we've been hasty in our actions. We've rushed into doing something that with hindsight we know to be wrong. Again, the book of Proverbs tells us, the plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. Proverbs 21:5. Once again, we would do well to pause and seek God's counsel before we act. We do not want to act in haste and later regret what we have said or done. We all want to live well and honour God with our lives.
It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said,
"We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God."
So these governors and satraps thronged before the king.
"King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisers, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter."
Therefore King Darius signed the written decree. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled, and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king, and spoke concerning the king's decree.
"Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?"
The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter.
That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day.
And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king.
"Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed."
So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel,
Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you.
Then a stone was brought, and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet ring, and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace, and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel,
Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?
O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you.
Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them, and broke all their bones in pieces, before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote,
To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions.
So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian.